One of the largest, most complex, and most impressive pantheons of gods in the ancient world was the Egyptian pantheon of gods. The Egyptian pantheon of gods featured some of the most powerful gods in human history, whose strength and fortitude brought light to the Egyptian civilization during its darkest moments. Welcome to History Facts. Today I'm going to tell you about the gods who changed the course of Egyptian history forever. So get ready, because it's about to become powerful. Let's get started. Amun-Ra. When we think about Egyptian gods, the first name that comes to our minds is Ra. The sun god Ra was the world's first pharaoh, a title that made him incredibly popular among the Egyptian nobility in those days when gods walked the length and breadth of Egypt. Every time a day began, Ra's golden sun ship sailed across the sky, while during the night he descended into the underworld of Duat to cruise the river of darkness and fight its monsters. When you spend a few generations fighting demons to prevent chaos from destroying the world, it is normal that you end up becoming a symbol of admiration and respect from your peers. Especially if you manage to kick the ass of the evil god Apophis, who basically existed to interrupt the nightly journey of Ra's solar boat to prevent the world from reaching a new day. Ra is also known for being the father of all gods and the creator of humanity itself, which naturally puts him above all other gods. He was one of the most influential gods in Egyptian history and managed to shape his glorious empire through his actions. Osiris. If Ra was life, then Osiris represented death itself. Osiris was another of the most important deities of Egypt, considered the inventor of agriculture and laws and the representative of the Nile River and the underworld. The existence of Osiris was worthy of the admiration of the entire pantheon, except that of his spiteful and jealous brother Seth. According to Egyptian mythology, Osiris was the most perfect of all kings. He was just, benevolent, generous to his subjects, and extremely intelligent. Unfortunately, every achievement Osiris made only served to make Seth even more jealous, who one day decided to mercilessly murder Osiris for having succeeded in civilizing the Egyptian nation. During an important celebration in which all the gods were gathered, Seth offered as a reward a beautiful coffin for that god who could manage to fit in perfectly. However, poor Osiris did not know that the coffin was designed to fit him, so it was like a ring on his finger. Once inside the coffin, his brother caught him, murdered him, and threw him into the Nile River to crown himself as the new king of Egypt. Not satisfied with this, Seth dismembered the corpse of Osiris in multiple fragments and spread them all over the world. Wow, that's cruel. I've never heard of anyone being killed for doing their job well. After Osiris's wife found all of her husband's pieces except for one fragment, he was resurrected, had a son, and left the world of the living to become the all-powerful ruler of the world of the dead. Curiously, the only fragment his wife could never find was his phallus, which had been eaten by a fish. Anubis. Before the incredible rise of Osiris as ruler of the world of the dead, another god ruled the underworld. His name was Anubis, referred to as the god of death, and he was a dog-headed god who was in charge of protecting the dead. One of the most curious things about Anubis was his peculiar appearance, because pre-dynastic Egyptians buried their dead at the edge of the desert in relatively shallow tombs. The corpses were easy targets for scavengers, including wild canines. For that reason, the Egyptians came up with a rather creative way to end this problem. Did they start digging deeper pits as civilized beings? Absolutely not. Instead of changing the way their dead were buried, they decided to turn to Anubis, the only dog-headed god who could stand up to these animals, since Egyptian culture believed that problems were best fought when the very force that caused them was used against them. And what could better protect the dead than a god with the face of a wild animal? Unfortunately, the rise and resurrection of Osiris as the god of the underworld left our beloved god Anubis unemployed. But every cloud has a silver lining. Succeeded by Osiris, Anubis could devote himself to preserving corpses, thus becoming the god of mummification. If not for Anubis's arduous efforts, souls would be trapped in the space between life and death forever. For this reason, Anubis went from being a feared god to becoming one of the most beloved entities by the ancient Egyptians. Thoth. While some people depicted the god of writing and wisdom in the form of a baboon, most depictions agreed that Thoth's appearance was that of a man possessing a bird-shaped head. Like many other gods of the Egyptian pantheon, Thoth had great contributions that helped make Egyptian civilization the most splendid of all empires. One of his greatest contributions was hieroglyphic writing, which allowed the Egyptians to leave their memories etched in icy stone. As the god of wisdom, Thoth controlled space and time at will and possessed magical knowledge far beyond the reach of the rest of the gods and mortals. Moreover, he assisted the funerary deities as their messenger, keeping their records. Whether new laws had to be created or the daily grievances of the gods had to be resolved, Thoth was always present to offer his guidance and wisdom to any being who needed it. And if a problem could not be solved, it had to be further discussed in the assembly. Thus he served as scribe and advisor to gods and was revered for being the inventor of the calendar. As for his role in Egyptian society, Thoth was responsible for recording the verdict of the weighing of the heart ceremony, a judgment that determined whether a person could continue on to the afterlife. If the heart or spirit was balanced with Ma'at's pen of truth, the soul was deemed worthy and allowed passage. But if not, well, I hope you had no plans to reunite with your ancestors. Bastet. All cat owners know that our cats think they own our homes. However, in ancient Egypt, that joke was closer to reality than you might imagine. Ancient Egyptian cats were extremely beloved and adorned with gold jewelry, and many of these four-legged creatures ate better food than the average Egyptian, even being buried with honors befitting royalty. However, the Egyptians' unconditional love for cats was not born out of disinterest, but because they considered them the sacred animals of Bastet, one of the greatest protective deities of the Egyptian pantheon. Just as Anubis and Thoth were represented by animal-faced gods, the image the Egyptians had of Bastet was similar to a lion-headed goddess who eventually evolved into a cat. Bastet was the Egyptian goddess of the home, feminine secrets, fertility, and childbirth. And she protected the home from evil spirits and diseases, especially those that attacked women and the vulnerable Egyptian child population. But when she was not guarding Egyptian homes, Bastet also served as the protector of all of Lower Egypt and the personal guardian of the sun god Ra. Bastet possessed a strong connection to the sun and the night because of her relationship with Ra and her feline side, and that made her one of the biggest enemies of the evil servant Apophis. Bastet's feline appearance gave Egyptian cats a status similar to that enjoyed by cows in today's Hindu society. If a person harmed a cat, it was considered an offense against the goddess, and the authorities severely punished the criminal. I think I've found my favorite goddess in the whole pantheon. Horus. Horus is one of the most significant gods of ancient Egypt. According to Egyptian mythology, he was a god closely linked to royalty who was in charge of guardianship of the Tainite monarchs. However, the real reason behind his birth are less noble than you might imagine. Horus played a significant role in the revenge of Osiris, and it was he who defeated the legendary and powerful god Seth. After his father Osiris was killed by Seth, his mother Isis conceived Horus, who protected him until he came of age, leaving him in the care of the kind god of wisdom Thoth. Thanks to the teachings of Thoth, Horus became a great warrior and marched to regain his father's throne and thus became the instrument of his vengeance. In some versions of the myth, Seth symbolizes the struggle against the aridity of the desert, while Horus represents the fertility of the Nile Valley. With Seth defeated and Osiris becoming the new ruler of the underworld, Horus was left in charge of the mortal world to lead the Egyptian civilization toward progress and glory. Thanks to the guidance and protection of these Egyptian gods and the defeat of the defeated evil Seth, there was nothing that could stand in the way of Egyptian society and prevent its splendorous rise. That's all for now. See you in the next video with another interesting topic.